Oh, hi class. How is everyone? All right, so today we're going to go on with, I guess, with our first pre-recorded lecture, and we're going to start the first lecture with Unit 4, Microorganisms and Disease. So here's a look at the outcomes, of learning objectives we'll go through for this unit. You can have a read down through these if you want. You'll also be able to find those on our course outline. Okay, so let's get started with today's lecture, and let's start with um, how we live with microorganisms every single day. Um, you can look here and you can see some numbers I've got on this slide. It's said that humans have around 30 trillion cells. So that makes up all of the different cells that are in our body. That makes up everything that we need to live a healthy life. Now, the old idea is that we were covered with 10 times the number of cells that we have in our own body. So the general rule used to be that we'd have a 10 to 1 ratio between bacteria and our cells. So 10 times more cells that are prokaryotic than compared to our cells, which are eukaryotic. Now, I'm saying prokaryotic, but I should mean that with our normal flora, we're going to have bacteria, we're going to have fungi, there's going to be protozoans, and of course viruses. So all these things are going to make up what we call our normal flora. Now, our normal flora is a mixture of all of these organisms. Some of them can be pathogenic, most of them are going to be harmless, and they can have species that come and go really quickly. They stay for a short time, and we call those the transient ones. And we have others that are here all the time. We can always find those type of species, and we refer to those as resident species. Now, most of these normal flora will not cause disease. Okay, we live happily with them for our entire lives. From the second you're born, you start to be colonized with bacteria and viruses and fungi and protozoans. And these organisms live with you for your entire life. They change as you get older, as you go through life, as you experience different things. But for the most part, we have a lot of different microorganisms that live with us constantly, every single day. Research recently has shown that instead of this old number here, the 10 to 1 ratio, what we expect to see now, based on a little bit better estimates, because we're never going to get this perfectly right, but we think now instead of 10 to 1, we're around a 1.3, I'll say bacteria, but I mean foreign organisms, so bacteria, fungi, protozoans, and viruses. We're about 1.3 of our normal fauna cells to about 1 of our own eukaryotic cells. So in either way, when you walk around, you're more your own body cells are less than the number of cells that you have that are living on or in you. So it's pretty interesting to think of when you think about how important these normal flora are to our everyday health. Now, this leads us to the idea of symbiosis. Symbiosis, again, always look at the words. If you can break it down, it makes it a lot easier. Biosis, of course, is going to mean something that's living, and sim means same or living in close contact. So when we have symbiosis, we mean that two organisms are living in close contact and they develop a relationship that we refer to as symbiotic. Most of the times we'll refer to the large organism as the host, and in this case we would be the host, and then the smaller organism is going to be the symbiont, and that's going to be our bacteria and fungi and protists and all that stuff that are living on our body. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these relationships a little bit more specifically, a little closer. So we'll have a couple of different relationships that can happen between us and our microflora. We'll have commensal, we'll have mutualistic, parasitic, and competition. First, let's have a look at commensal. In a commensal relationship, we're going to look at one organism is generally benefited and the other one is not affected at all. So we often express this as a plus relationship because one organism gets a benefit out of it and the other organism doesn't benefit or doesn't get harmed, so we call that zero. So a +0 relationship. If we look at the bacteria on our skin, a bacteria in our respiratory or general gastrointestinal tract, those bacteria are there, they have a place to live, they have access to food and resources, but they don't bother us. They don't give us any advantage, they don't give us any disadvantage. So it's a plus for them, it's a 0 for us. The next relationship we can look at is a mutualistic relationship. Now, a mutualistic relationship is a positive relationship. Both organisms in that relationship, the host and the symbiont, benefit. So we call this a plus relationship. So if we look at more specifically at, in our case, bacteria and our normal flora, for example, these can assist in our immune system. So they get a place to live, we get an increased immune system. They can help us in nutrient metabolism, vitamin production, and waste processing. So again, they get a place to live, they get lots of nutrients, and their metabolism gives us some stuff in return. So these things are a plus relationship. This is a good relationship for both species. Then we go to something a little bit more less positive. We look at a parasitic relationship. Now, in a parasitic relationship, the bacteria is going to benefit. It's going to get some good out of this, and the host is going to be harmed. It's going to be a negative. So in this relationship, we'd say it's a positive relationship, and then it's going to be a negative effect on the other organism. So if we look at parasitic, we think of what we talked about in lab. Giardia, Cryptosporidium, tapeworms, blood flukes, which are, fluke is another word for worm. So these things are all going to get advantages in food and a place to live from us, but they're going to cause us harm by either taking nutrients from us or directly feeding off us, damaging our tissue, and so forth. So that's a parasitic relationship. And then we'll have competition. And competition happens in almost any relationship on the planet. And it generally works out to be a negative relationship if we look at it in the strictly biological sense of the word. But often competition makes organisms within a relationship stronger. We'll have one species generally outcompetes another, and when we say that, we mean one species is successful when the other one isn't. So one species will be able to reproduce, will be able to gather much more food, have a stronger, healthier lifestyle, and the other species won't have access to those relationships. But competition we'll get back to. Now, our microflora or microbiome has a lot of benefits for us. It's a very important part of what makes our life possible, and this is becoming more and more apparent as we get through more and more studies, especially with the new project called the Human Microbiome Project. And you could check that out online, and it's got a ton of fascinating research letting us know some stuff that we had no idea about in the past. But some of the things that we get directly from our microflora are chemical secretions. So we have bacterial species within our guts, within our body, that will help us secrete stuff that we couldn't do before. And for example, E. coli in our gut, that will help us synthesize vitamin K. So that's an important part of our metabolism. It helps us get extra vitamin K that we wouldn't have before. Having all of those organisms living in our body, it does a couple of things. It helps us recognize what's not supposed to be there, because we kind of know what's supposed to be there because they live there all the time. And by doing that, they stimulate our immune system. So our immune system is constantly being challenged by these organisms, not to the point where it's going to cause us any real problems, but it's activated. So if something else comes along that shouldn't be there, then our immune system is already working, so it will work faster, and there's less chance that you will get sick. Another thing that these will do is they prevent pathogenic bacteria from colonizing tissue, and what that basically means is we have bacteria and microflora growing all over our body, and these are ones that aren't causing us any issues or any problems. So they basically take up space. If that space is not available, then we can't have these dangerous ones, these pathogenic ones coming in and causing infection. So they prevent pathogenic bacteria from colonizing because they outcompete them. So that's a really powerful tool for us to prevent infection. And finally, we see these chemicals called bacteriocins. And these are a peptide or a protein-based toxin, really. And when bacteria grow into a certain area and they develop residency there, they're going to stay there. They produce these bacteriocins, and what they'll do is they'll prevent other similar species from growing there. So they kind of take a monopoly on the real estate, and they don't let their close relatives move in. If we look at the large intestine, we get a bunch of different species growing there. This is just a really small example. We think there's somewhere around 600 different species that live in our large intestine, so that'll give you an idea of the diversity that we have there. But we look at this Bifidobacterium as a probiotic. Escherichia coli, like I said, helps us produce vitamin K. Bacteroides, lactobacillus, these are important bacteria that ferment food in our guts and help keep us healthy. Now, our normal flora will typically not cause illness in humans. They tend to live there quite happily, and they keep us healthy. If you have a healthy immune system, that's always going to be something we need to realize as an assumption here. If your immune system is healthy and functional. These organisms can become opportunistic. So if a situation presents themselves, they can take over a place, they can move into areas where they shouldn't be, and they can cause us a lot of trouble, a lot of problems. This is particularly a case with people who are immune deficient, and you guys probably heard the word immunocompromised a million times in the news recently because of this COVID pandemic. But people go through certain treatments, they go through drug treatments, or they have diseases that deactivate or lessen their immune system. If that happens, then these normal flora, of course, can cause us more problems. Also, with the elderly, as you get older, your immune system tends to work less efficiently. So opportunistic infections are quite common in elderly people when their immune systems aren't working as well as they should. Some of the examples of these guys that can cause us our problems are Streptococcus pneumoniae or Staphylococcus aureus. These are two species that grow in the nose, so the upper respiratory tract, generally give us no problem whatsoever. We call them benign. But if they colonize other areas of the body, they can be highly pathogenic and they can even kill. Streptococcus pneumoniae, of course, if it gets in the lungs, the name says it all. It could cause lung infections. Staphylococcus aureus, if it gets into a cut or something on your skin, it can cause a very serious skin infection. And you guys have all heard of MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Well, of course, that's the Staphylococcus aureus we're talking about. Something else, though, and a positive note, is these things can often be, there's often wisdom in some of these species. So recently there was a bacteria that grows in the nose, Staphylococcus lugdunensis, and this bacteria was cultured from somebody's nose, and it was found to have an antibiotic property, and as a result of that, we've created a new class of antibiotics which could be quite effective going forward. So this was serendipitous, which means kind of a lucky mistake or a happy accident, if you will.